Welcome to FO Talks. With me is my dear friend Joseph Olmert. As most of you know, Joseph is a regular author at Fair Observer. He has fought in the Yom Kippur War. He has been a professor. He has served in Israel's defense ministry. He comes from an eminent political family, and few people understand Israel and the region as well as Joseph does. So, Joseph, welcome.
Thank you very much. Always pleasure to be with you, Atul.
Thank you, Joseph. So, we are speaking at a time when Israel has struck Iran, Tehran has hit back. What now? And let me kick off with the first question, which is what exactly did Israel do to Iran in the early hours of Friday, the 13th of June?
Well, what Israel did to Iran was the product, as we are told, of many, many years of planning. According to all kinds of sources in Israel, the
Yeah.
planning changed, of course, with years, but there were times in which people saw that it could have been good enough to do something like that in the past. The planning, of course, was about intelligence in the first place, and the level of intelligence penetration by Israel to Iran has been exceptional, amazing. I think that something that should be learned in every place where they teach about intelligence in modern warfare or as a part of modern warfare. But it had also it had a strategic goal. The goal was to really paralyze the Iranian ability to react to what is happening by eliminating the leadership that could make decisions as to how to react militarily. And that in itself was a surprise because, according to all kinds of theories and speculations, I should say, for years, everybody saw that something like this will be a surprise, of course, as it was,
Yeah.
but it will be mainly a cyber surprise.
Yeah. So
And
very quickly, I'm hearing from my friends in the IDF that Iranians expected the Israelis to hit the nuclear facilities and the missile launch sites and other military bases first. Instead, Israel eliminated the top military leadership, took
Well,
out
that's
the top
exactly the
people.
point I'm making. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that was the surprise on the
correct. And
surprise of the surprise,
and
and
that made it easier for them to then hit the targets because command
yeah,
and control
because
was
it
broken.
left the Iranians paralyzed for hours, and in these hours there was a massive and very effective attack, of course, on the beginning of the attack on sites, strategic, nuclear, and all that comes with it. And just let me make a little point here. In a situation like that, it's Monday morning quarterbacking. In retrospect, you can say, how did they
Yeah.
know this or how did they know that? But when you look at what they did with Hezbollah, you see that for months prior to the famous Beeper attack, they were eliminating as many people as possible from the second level command of the Hezbollah. And the idea was to do exactly what they did in Iran in a matter of minutes or a few hours. And this was to weaken, if not even to paralyze the ability of the
Mhm.
leadership to function in the absence of the people that really execute the orders.
Mm.
So in the case of Hezbollah, it was a long process. Here, it had to do very quick. And this makes this intelligence achievement even bigger because they have had a list of 20 people, and you know what? All these 20 people were eliminated. They
Yeah.
found them in different places at the same time, which shows that the level of intelligence penetration was really amazing. And not that I care about what the Iranians think, but if I was an Iranian, a high level guy, I
Oh,
would say to
Joseph,
myself,
that's a lie. You do care about what the
oh yeah,
Iranians
yeah. What? How could they? Yeah, how could they do that? I would think to myself,
do.
how could they do that? For God's sake! And as you understand, of course, it still sends vibes of nervousness and restiveness in the Iranian situation, in the Iranian leadership, as to who are the people that really allow them to do so.
Mhm.
So I think that this was a genius masterstroke.
Good. So, what Israel did was get information, um, achieve intelligence penetration to a very high degree, take out the command and control, smuggle not just equipment, but also assemble it there. Quadcopters apparently were assembled in Iran, and carry out a complex operation. Okay, well done, chapeau. Now what? What is the end goal? What, you know,
That's as
what has it
always is.
actually achieved? Did they actually damage nuclear facilities? Did they actually degrade military sites? Did they take out air defense? So I'm more interested in this in the substantive achievements.
The achievements are substantive, but they are not complete, they are not final, and maybe they are a little bit less dramatic than what preceded them because of one factor
Mhm.
which we have to take into account, and this is the time factor.
Got it.
The Israelis talk about weeks. There are no weeks. They do not have weeks. They have few days, and even not too many days. So when we talk about, say, first of all, the nuclear sites, Natanz is basically finished.
Hmm.
Farchan or Porchan attacked.
Hmm.
Fordo, that's the one that is dug deep down and all that. Leave it as it is right now. What is happening there, I am not sure that we know for sure, but there are hints. Put it this way,
Mhm.
there are hints, there are indications that something is in the planning and maybe even in the making. And there are ways in which they can overcome the question of the depth of the installations. And I will not be surprised if in the very near future we shall hear about some kind of an operation there. And I'll tell you why, because a similar operation took place in Syria a few months ago to deal with the chemical storehouses of the old Assad regime in a place which was dug underground and it was totally demolished by an Israeli daring commando operation. So let's leave it at that point. But the other element about the nuclear program is that 14 major scientists who are really the brains of the program, they were all eliminated.
Okay. So
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 to
this
give
is what.
you just one more second, to give you
Mhm.
percentage number of what does it mean in terms of the overall program, is it 46% or 62%? I don't know. It is
Mhm.
definitely the most significant ever attack on this program in all these years, and it is slowing it down. Now the question, of course, is how long and this and that. Obviously, you will come and ask these questions.
Perfect. So, what has Iran done in response? We are reading about hits to Tel Aviv, hits to Haifa port. Um, there is a real fear of increased ballistic missile uh, hits to all sorts of Israeli targets. So, paint us a picture of how Iran has reacted and what is the cost, what is the price that Israel is paying.
Well, okay, 3 points here. First of all, the Iranian reaction is totally in the realm of the expectation. So there's no
Okay.
surprise here. So that in itself is an interesting factor because of all the rhetoric, the propaganda before about God knows what, and so on and so forth. By the way, in the last hour or so, there has been another unprecedented threat. Tonight, there will be the greatest ever attack in history on Israel as a response to the Israeli demolition of the Iranian broadcasting house in Tehran. I don't know if you saw the pictures of that
Mm.
about 2 or 3 hours ago
No, I
as we
missed
talk.
it, but
Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah, okay. So what the Iranians are doing is they try to launch as many ballistic missiles as possible. So what is happening now about that is very simple. There is a race against time. The Israeli Air Force, with a lot of intelligence, is going systematically over sites of Iranian missiles to try and destroy and demolish them before they can use them. So they already have some success in that, or some would say even great success, because the Iranians are not capable, since the beginning of this war, to fire more rocket than what they did in October. They fire less and even significantly less. So that's one element of the situation. The second element of the situation is the targets. We know what they're after, but strategically speaking, as of now, and I emphasize, as of now, they haven't achieved any strategic result really, because even if they cause damage to the Israeli refinery in Haifa or to the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot or south of Tel Aviv and so on and so forth, these are not strategic damages to Israel. They still try to do it, and hopefully they will not be able, but they haven't yet done it.
I
But
mean, but
there's
the
another
thought.
point, the third point. As I said, 3 points. But the third point,
Mhm.
and I would like to call attention to it, the psychological element. Look, Israelis are not used to this kind of attacks,
Mm.
and it is definitely starting to become an issue. It's becoming an issue. The numbers of casualties are 24 people already, which is, compared to what the Iranians sustain, is not much, but it is 24 in Israel. It is a lot. The
No, you have
physical
6
damage is
million. A
noticeable.
population of 6 million, they have 90 million.
Yeah, we have 10 million and 90 million. The
Oh, so you have
psychological,
10.
yeah,
Okay.
the psychological damage I took, that remains to be seen. I would leave it open as of now, but that is a factor to be taken into account. Now, the rumors are that when the Israeli cabinet finally decided to go ahead with it, the estimates about casualties in Israel given to them by the intelligence community ranged from 800 to 4,000. So if you want to be totally on the realm of the analysis, forget about the emotional side of casualties and all that, you can argue if there after 4 days, that's the toll 24, it could have been far worse. You can say it's bad enough. So it's a question of how you look at it. That's why I leave this one open. It's in the eye of the beholder in Israel for public opinion.
Okay. So very quickly to go back to my mistake, I said 6
Yeah.
million. I was thinking more of the Jewish population. It's actually 7
The Jewish
million.
population is 7.5 million. Yeah.
Okay, so 7.5. So I stand corrected. I underestimated. Apologies. But 7.5 million and 90 million is a huge differential. Your casualty tolerance would be much lower. And it seems a million Israelis have already left Israel. Is that
No,
rumor or is that information campaigns?
completely nonsensical. Like
Okay,
Netanyahu fled the country. All this is
okay.
nonsense.
All shits and giggles.
On the contrary, they are now having a campaign
Mm.
to bring to Israel all those Israelis who are stuck outside of Israel, and they claim that there may be 150,000 Israelis that were traveling abroad when it started, and they started registration online so that the Israeli authorities will be able to start the air train to Israel. They say that within few hours, 60,000 registered. So the movement is opposite. I mean, people come back.
Okay, jolly good. So you've told me what Israel did. You've told me how Iran has responded. Um, quick point, you said it's the psychological dimension is what matters. I'd just like to point out that yes, that is true, but if they hit more strategic targets like Haifa, if they manage to do that, that'll also take a toll. My next question is a simple one and a complicated one. How long do you expect this conflict to continue?
That's the point. Look, the Israeli Air Force is in total control of the skies of Iran. This is unprecedented. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
You
So
did that in
this
Syria. You, in fact, just destroyed the whole air force in Syria.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they have a free corridor from Israel via Syria and Iraq to Iran. It's like unbelievable. So that is a great achievement, but there's always a but. Now Netanyahu is having to make huge decisions. And what is the first decision which comes to your question is, so what to do with this superiority? Should
Mm.
we still continue to go after more and more Iranian generals and all that, and every day they eliminate more of them? Should we go after the Iranian infrastructure economically, the oil industry, but
Mhm.
then we might have issues with the big brother in Washington who would
Mhm.
not like to see oil prices going up? or any other ally of Israel, including, by the way, India.
Mhm.
Should we do
I think
uh,
no one outside oil producing nations like high oil prices, Joseph. That's fair to say.
fantasy or not, nobody would like to think that if you pay X for oil, now you will pay X plus God knows what in 2 days' time if you hear that the refineries in Abadan, Awaz, and all these places are off. And they could be off any minute now. It's
Yeah.
just a question of Israel decision. Or Netanyahu will say, you know what, let's humiliate the leadership there by attacking more and more institution of state power
Mm.
in order, and I know it would lead to an inevitable question from you, in order to finally encourage the Iranian opposition to go to the streets in large numbers, feeling that the regime is weak and weakening
Mm.
because of these attacks on their centers of power. I mean, so that's the decision that will decide the length of the situation. The more you do, the less time you have to do it. Why?
Mm.
Because the logic is the more you do, it will become this apocalyptic international crisis that will require intervention, and all this talk about ceasefire will become more immediate. So that's kind of a little of catch 22 for the Israeli government. You want to ruin the oil industry? You bring about quicker intervention of the world. You don't want to go after the oil industry. You want to go after more people. You want to go after government institutions. They can still sustain it more time, the Iranians.
Mhm.
So that's a kind of confusing situation.
That's a catch 22. Now, since you've laid it out so beautifully, let me ask you a follow up question, and we'll come to certain other points to follow upon later. But the obvious one then is, what are the strategic, I repeat,
Two.
what are the strategic goals
Two.
of
There
both
are two simple
countries,
ones. It's
Israel
what
and
they
Iran?
it's what they say is really what they have in mind. First of all, to incapacitate this nuclear program in a way that will make them decide that it is a non-entity for them anymore. It's a worthless investment because it's the current one is destroyed or mostly destroyed, and to rebuild it, it's. The second strategic goal is to encourage the forces in Iran that would like to bring down the regime. That's as simple as that. To weaken the Iranian regime to the point where they will not they will not having the energy to deal with the rest of the region and so on and so forth, and they will have to fight for their own survival. These are the two strategic goals, as simple as they are.
And what about Iran's strategic goal?
Their strategic goal is to maintain their position as the superpower of the Middle East, and they already failed in that because look, they are not a paper tiger, but they are not far different than that. When it happens, we look at the Ukrainian situation, right? And now let's think about it just for 1 second. And the comparisons are superficial and they always have to be taken into account. The situation is very different. But do we look at Russia today the same way that we looked at Russia 3.5 years ago in terms of strength, power, and influence? Of course not. Do people in the Middle East look at Iran today the way they looked at it just 4 days ago? Again, no. So the Iranians are already losing in that sense. In order for them not to lose, they have to turn around completely what has happened in the last 4 days. And I doubt that they can do it.
Mhm. So you mentioned regime change, and you're not the only
I
one.
didn't mention the word regime change. I was careful.
Okay, all
Bring
right.
about the
Okay,
opposition forces.
okay, all right. So let us say you weaken the Iranian political leadership of mullahs who are reputedly now old and corrupt, and they've lost their revolutionary zeal. They have lost support of vast sections of the population, and the opposition rises up. Okay, how realistic, may not have mentioned regime change, but a lot of other people are talking about a change of regime, popular uprising, new government. How realistic is all this talk?
You know what? it may look like it's not realistic, but look how quickly the regime of Bashar Assad finally collapsed, even though there were people say, like your humble servant, who 5 years ahead of time said that he's not going to stay there. And it took 5 years. Here it will take much less time. Bear in mind that there are various elements here at play. First of all, the minorities. They already are out calls to the Kurds to rise up by all kinds of Kurdish factions. I don't hear
Mhm,
from the Baluchis. I don't hear from the Arabs in the south of Iran. I don't hear from other minorities. The Azeris, of course, is
mhm.
the key here. So there are minorities.
So let's stop here for a second.
Yeah.
So in this vision, maybe this Mossad vision of Iran, you have the Balochis become semi-independent. They have their own enclave. You have the Arabs who are autonomous. You have the Kurds who establish some kind of autonomy, just like in Iraq
Right.
and Syria. And Azerbaijan has its own Azeri enclave of influence. And then, of course, Iran is reduced to its core Farsi speaking population, the Fars people. And Iran does not then have the internal cohesion and the political strength to project power in the Middle East. Is that the long game?
Uh, it may be for some people, but I don't, I talked about possibilities. Now let's talk about likelihoods.
Okay.
It's not going to be like that because you're talking about different minorities, different regions with different traditions, and numbers also matter. Baluchis are about 2 million. They are in between Iran and Pakistan. I don't think the Pakistanis will be so happy to see the Baluchis on their border like an independent or semi-independent or autonomous even region. So just an example. Uh,
But
but
the
I
Indians would be very happy.
sorry.
The Indians would be very happy.
The Indians would be, but what are they going to do about it? Okay. So look, no, it's not so realistic in terms of how it will happen, but you talk here about the possibility of a chaotic situation, more or less like the one that existed after the initial takeover by the mullahs in February of 1979, which basically lasted until the fateful decision of Saddam Hussein to invade Iran in September of 1980. All this time in between was a chaotic situation in Iran, and Iran was basically torn apart and all that. And
Mhm.
that kind of situation can happen and may very well happen. But look, there are other forces at play here. Other forces may be the more liberal minded elements in the big cities, the monarchists. But there still are monarchists. Look, I know that people say that the crown prince is not exactly the most charismatic and impressive person, but they have some support. I mean,
I mean,
and of course,
look, Joseph,
the,
Joseph. I
the Mujahideen Hulk, and all these groups.
Joseph, they have support in the expat community, but I hear from many friends in intelligence that the Pahlavis are out of touch, the
No,
Pahlavis are
Pahlavis,
pissed
yeah,
off,
I agree with
and
you.
they cannot go back to having a monarchy
No, as I said,
in
he's not,
Iran.
yeah.
And then besides, the Pahlavi's daughter has married a Jewish boy. So
Yeah, well, so maybe that's the beginning of the historic alliance being resumed. But look,
you
but
did
look,
well. I mean, does he work for the Mossad?
well, you have to ask him. But look, bear in mind that when you talk about the expats,
Yeah.
when Khomeini came, he was an expat. All
Yeah,
the
from
mullahs that
Paris. He was
came with
living in
him were
Paris.
expats, and the professors that were the immediate circle around him, Ibrahim Yazdi, God bless, if you remember, Bani Sadr, Ibrahim Yazdi, and all they were all great professors in the best universities of the world, and they were expats. So being an expat here is not a disadvantage necessarily. It could be a big advantage.
Yeah, maybe, but the expats didn't work out very well when it came to Iraq 2003.
But look, obviously they lacked the popular support that the Ayatollah had in the end. We know that, of course. We know what happened. But I'm saying, look, the expats took over Iran after 79, and then the mullahs took
So,
over
so
between.
let me tell you what some of our friends in intelligence and uh,
And by the way, intelligence
this,
people can be very wrong, as you
yeah,
know.
yeah, agreed, absolutely. The entire weapons of mass destruction claim was bullshit. So,
Okay, yeah.
but let's talk about what historians have said too, and what they say is that look. The regime does not have support of the young, or largely, you can't say, there must be some young religious people,
Oh,
of
yeah,
course.
yeah, sure.
So it does not have support of the young, the urban, the educated, and women. But the regime still has support amongst the religious elements of society in small towns, villages, in the seminaries, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is still a fantastic vehicle for social mobility if you come from a humble background.
That's true, but bear in mind that the Revolutionary Guards and the Basij, in the end of the day, they are an oppressive mechanism. So
Mhm,
they will be the ones to be under attack, you know.
mhm.
And look, I agree with you that if you ask me now,
Yeah.
as we talk today, what's going to happen in the immediate future, I don't see this regime collapsing, but I see already good signs. I have the beholder, of course, if they are good or bad signs, that they are weakening. Give you one little example, just one little example. In the last few days, you didn't see even once, other than one time with the supreme leader, anything from any leader of Iran appearing live on television talking to the Iranian people. In a dictatorship like that, when people don't see their leaders, they start thinking that something bad is happening. A little example. A little example.
Mm,
You know, let's take an historic example. Go back, June of 1941, when the Nazis attacked the Soviet Union.
mm,
Stalin was not speaking to the people until the 3rd of July. Molotov was the first one to talk, and Molotov was as boring a speaker as you know what. So,
mm.
what I'm trying to tell you is,
Stalin was no Trotsky either. He wasn't a
yeah,
great orator.
oh, of course, yeah, but he was Stalin still.
Yeah.
Stalin, the man of steel. But
Mm,
look, the point really that I'm trying to make to you is the Iranian people is aware today of the fact that the leadership failed to deliver on their promises, that they can defend Iran, that they can destroy Israel, all this. And when you have something like that in a dictatorship, that's the beginning of a process.
mm.
How quickly it will be and how exactly it will shape up depends on what is going to happen in the battleground in the next few days.
Got it.
And that brings it back to the Israeli decision that I talked to you about, these three options that Israel has. We'll see what happens.
Okay. So you've talked about the battleground. Let's go back to the battleground. How big is the risk of Iranian missiles hitting strategic targets in Israel,
It is a risk.
including
Yeah.
Dimona, your nuclear plant or your
Yeah,
nuclear plant?
I think that yes, theoretically it is a problem. It's not going to happen, but they
Mm,
definitely can try, and they may try. They can definitely try and may succeed against airports. That some of their airports already are totally demolished. So
mhm,
in the meantime, it happens there, not in Israel.
mhm,
But bear in mind that the best brains of Israel are working like 48 hours a day now, not 24 hours a day, to find immediate solutions to some of the problems that they found out about the
mhm.
Iranian missiles. And don't forget that they have good brains over there and they can find immediate solutions. But we'll see what happens. Look, it's not risk free for Israel, not at all. And I talk to people, and people are very euphoric about the initial success and all that. They look at it really as an historic achievement.
Yeah.
But you have to be very careful. You have to be very not modest, maybe, but very realistic about the possibility that things will not necessarily be only on the upside. They can be also be on the downside. Uh, all I read in the last day or so, and I'm sure that you do as well, is that the Iranians are really begging for a ceasefire. And those
Mhm.
who beg for a ceasefire are those who believe that they have more to lose. I mean, that's a simple formula. I mean, it's simple logic.
Mm, I see. So that means that you are not too concerned about that risk. So let's say
I'm
that.
concerned. Let's put it this way. I will not quantify the level of concern. I'm concerned.
Okay. Okay, fine. Let's move on to something else. Can we expect Iran to close the Strait of Hormuz and jack up global oil prices?
Yes, but that's what I talked before about the oil prices and all this, whether we destroy them or if they do that, it shows to you the level of desperation. So, what is the point here? So, what
Mm.
will they achieve? Trump will give Israel 48 hours to finish the war. In the meantime, America will start bombarding Iran. It cannot look. It can happen. Definitely can happen. But between us, which means you, me, and our millions of viewers, right? I mean, that's what I heard about Fair Observer. I mean, will they really achieve anything useful for them if they do that? That can happen.
So,
By the
but
way, very easily.
to
They can do it very
take
easily.
you back, to it, it is, you seem to imply it's not in their strategic interest to do that, because then the US will be drawn into the battle, and that would make them lose far more rapidly than now.
Yes, but that brings it back to the entire question of also the Israeli options. I mean, because the Israelis are having to decide, you want to go after their economic infrastructure. Israel can do it at any given time now because they have complete aerial superiority. But here is the point. The point is that Mr. Trump and other friends of Israel will say to Israel, you've gone too far because now it's our problem. And if it's our problem,
But on one level, Iran just is producing 300,000 barrels of oil a day, really.
no,
Or
I think
that's,
more. I see
no, no,
much
more.
more.
Sorry, 300,000 is what they send out, they export, and most of it goes to China.
Yeah,
And the global production is 100 million. So
yeah.
if you knock Iranian oil supply off the global market, it's not such a big deal,
It's
is it? It's not
psychological.
such a biggie.
You know how the market works. And by the way,
Okay.
the Israeli market went up today.
Mm,
Went up today in shares and in terms of the shekel versus the dollar, which indicates to you how people in Israel feel about
mm.
the situation. It's psychological. I think, by the way, that you're wrong about it. They produce 1.4 million barrels a day.
No, I am wrong about it.
How much they sell to
Yeah.
a particular country. By the way, the fact that they sell so much to China is also a factor.
Hmm.
The Chinese can react by sending a flotilla of transport planes with equipment, with this, with that. Who
Hmm.
knows? I mean, look, uh, this situation of the oil, as I said before, can lead up to a worldwide crisis.
Okay. So, talking about a worldwide crisis, the Israelis often argue that they are doing the dirty work for the Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain. After all, the Saudis and the Bahrainis have Shia minorities, and they want to curb Iran. However, I point out to them, and I'm sure you are very well aware of this. The Arab street is not on the same page as the Arab palace. The sentiment in the Muslim world, from Turkey to Indonesia, has also turned against Israel. So, what are the medium and long term risks to Israel of this increasingly hostile Arab and Muslim public opinion?
That's a good question, and the answer is simple, easier said than done, of course. It depends on the results of the situation. If the mullahs are down, so, let them hate, but there are no mullahs. If the mullahs are still in, and
Mm,
somehow they come out of it claiming that they stood up to the rest of the world and withstood the pressure, even though a few days ago they talked about destroying Israel and wiping it off the map and all that. That's another situation. So we have to wait and see how it will all end. But with regard to the Gulf countries, I'm struck, by the way, by the fact that the condemnation of Israel and all that. And of course, the lip service is there, you can imagine, but behind closed doors, I can assure you, they're jubilant and happy like crazy. I mean, and some, by the way, social media bloggers and all that in the Gulf are very, very strongly in favor of Israel. I mean, I even saw those who say, our Israeli Jewish brothers, we are with you, and evoke, the Sunni Shia situation and all that. Look,
yeah, that is true. But let's not get away from the fact that whether it is Pakistan, whether it is India, where you have 200 million Muslims, whether it is Indonesia, where you have even more Muslims in the Muslim world, and even amongst Muslims who work in the State Department. there is sympathy for
Well,
Palestinians.
I'm
There
sure,
is
yeah.
sympathy for Gazans. You
No,
can't
no
run away
question
from
about.
that
Oh, yeah,
fact.
huge, huge level of sympathy. No question about that. Yeah.
And
Look,
even in Western capitals, and we've seen action by Canada, by UK, by
there's
France.
no look. There is no question, none whatsoever, that we are not here to talk about the overall implications of 7th
No,
of
no,
October and
exactly.
all that, But if we just touch upon it very briefly, uh, it's a new world order in many respects. It is already is, and the Israelis realize that, and I think that they understand it, but the way Israelis understand sometimes situations is different than what people would like them to understand it, because it comes back also to the traditional historic Jewish narrative of they're all against us at any rate. And now you can see, and that strengthens, whom politically.
Yeah,
So, it works in all kinds of ways. I mean, it's not leading to one particular
yeah.
outcome here.
Got it. So you realize that public opinion, not just in the Muslim world, but also in the West, is turning. But there is this long tradition, almost Jewish paranoia. Everyone is against us. We are the persecuted lot. So politically, there isn't that
I
much.
would say sometimes even paranoids are right.
Yeah, all right. So let's say there isn't that much. It doesn't affect Israeli policy per se. And that brings me on to a second question. There is the G7 meeting in Kananskis, Canada, apparently. I have
Yeah.
never been there. I don't know if you have. And there is the NATO meeting in Rome, Italy, where I have been a few times. My question is not a tourist question. My question is, do you think the G7 powers, um, of course, led by the US, and NATO, of course, again led by the US, are going to put pressure on Israel to stop?
They will, but not immediately. They will. As I said
Okay.
before, the time factor is there, and they will. They will. And the Iranians, in a very cynical way, can provoke Israel to activities that will create the sense of almost like near apocalyptic crisis. And the more it looks like ominous and dangerous and dramatic, the more pressure will be to intervene. Therefore,
So
I said,
what could the Iranians do?
well, you know what? If, for example, God forbid, they succeed in bringing down big building in Tel Aviv with 50 casualties, Israelis will react huge. And then again, I mean, the
And
site.
God forbid they strike the nuclear site Dimona.
Yeah, well, okay. The airport in Ben Gurion Airport, any of those, look, there are many possibilities here. We don't need to give ideas to anyone about that. But
True,
look,
true.
yeah, but God forbid, as I said, the Iranians, the logic of the Iran position today, which is we would like to have an immediate ceasefire, but we also have to threaten that, God forbid, we can do whatever to the Israelis. It's the two sides of the same coin. They really want to bring about pressure to end this situation as quickly as possible, either through threatening that, God forbid, who knows what can happen, or by simply indicating that if there is a ceasefire, we shall make concessions about the enrichment and all that. And you know what? When you talk about the greatest ally of Israel, the US, with the president who is, how to say it in polite English, whimsical and spontaneous, spontaneous. So who knows? And I've never been a Trumpist, and I'm not part of the Trump cult. Things can change. They're meeting as we talk, So if they listen to us, who knows what they can decide about all that, But look, it's not going to end just like that in a matter of few hours. And there still is time for the Israelis to make a decision and to try and go with it, as we talked before about their options, and we'll see how it develops. But clearly, the Israelis do not have unlimited amount of time available to them.
Okay,
Talk about weeks is nonsense.
got it. Okay, so let's speak about someone else. We've spoken about the mullahs. We've spoken about certainly Donald Trump, who apparently shot down the Israeli plan to kill Ayatollah Khamenei. So he
Maybe it
says,
did, maybe it didn't,
yeah,
maybe it's part of a deception, all
yeah.
these talks,
Anyway,
Yeah.
but uh, we have to talk about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, or Benjamin Netanyahu, or
Yeah.
Bibi as he's known as. Bibi is still prosecuting the war in Gaza.
Oh, it does, yeah.
Some reservists are going in for their seventh or perhaps eighth tour of duty. The Haredis, religious Jews, are still not doing military service, even though the law has changed. No politician has imposed the law yet. The the economy is under strain. Yes, the stock market is up, as you pointed out, but the economy is under strain. Israeli economists themselves have been talking about this. And we have the two lovely gentlemen, Smotrich and Ben Gvir, saying all kinds of lovely things.
Yeah.
So, to go back to in the context of Iran, quantity has its own quality. And Iran is a big state. Iran has a lot of people. Iran has some clever people. Um, yes, they've taken a huge hit. Um, but of course, when you kill older people, you may get people in their place who are younger, more competent, and have higher testosterone. So, in the long run, not immediately, it may turn out to be uh, 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 shall we say, a long-term benefit for Iran. So my question is, and this is the final question: by attacking Iran, has Israel bitten off more than it can chew?
I hope not, of course, but we are not going to conquer Iran or, you know, take over any piece of land over there.
Yeah,
But look, the question really is great as usual, but the point is coming back to the simple answer depends on what will be the fate of the regime. Iran doesn't need
the
historical.
Iranian or the Israeli regime? Are we talking about Bibi's coalition as well?
First of all, the Iranian will come to Benjamin Netanyahu as well. Trust me. I mean, I will come to it. Look,
Yeah.
if there is a change of regime in Iran, so it's a new ballgame at any rate, and
And
historically,
what's the
remember.
what's the time span? When do you expect that? Three
Well,
years? Five
that's we
years?
already discussed it. I don't know, but
Hmm.
look, that depends a lot on decisions that are being taken now that might be executed in a matter of a
Understood.
few
Understood.
days.
Yeah.
Now, if you talk about Israel, I would say to you, yes, all that you said about Netanyahu is absolutely right. The point is that Netanyahu is even before the beginning of this war. When you look at the Israeli political map, something very interesting. If you
Hmm.
look at the polls,
Hmm.
the hawkish parties are having 75, 80 seats in the Knesset.
Hmm.
Netanyahu maybe 20 only, but Bennett 25 or 30. Bennett is not exactly a pussycat, not exactly dovish.
Hmm.
Lieberman is 15 to 18, and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
So the Israeli political map, with or without Netanyahu, is not going to be too conducive to great historic compromises about Gaza.
Got it.
And from that onwards to the Palestinian situation altogether. Smotrich and Ben Gvir, look, you don't want me to say what I think about them because I don't want to badmouth, okay? So
Mhm.
let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
The challenge is really for Netanyahu. But that's something that I can say, you can ask, you can say, it's his decision. If he comes out of this situation as a big hero, redeeming to an extent his tarnished reputation as the strong man, Mr. Security, and all that, he will have to make his second historic decision what we do about Gaza and the Palestinians. And in that case, he can make big concessions, not to Hamas, of course. Hamas is out of the game, from that perspective. And that remains to be seen. For example, he can say to the Israeli people, look, we have removed the existential threat, which is Iran. We can be much more flexible about just stopping the war in Gaza now. Whatever we achieved, we achieved. Even it's unilateral, ceasefire. Let them now decide what they do with the hostages. And if the hostages come back, well, he's a big hero. So that really depends on Netanyahu to a large extent. And that brings it the big question that we shall not get now into discussion about the role of one individual or individuals in shaping
Yeah.
history and all that. It's a big question.
Next time we can discuss Yahya Sinwar
Next
and
time,
how
if
he
you will.
triggered
Okay,
everything.
next time, yeah.
Yeah.
And that really is an open question, but it still now all depends on how this situation in Iran ends.
So, what are Bibi's choices? What is he likely to do? Because he's a hawk. He has always talked about Iran being the
That's the point.
existential
He
enemy of
always
Israel.
talked about Iran, and now I can say I told you, and I did.
Mhm.
And I did. And now I'm telling you that we have removed the biggest threat to our security. We can be more flexible about other issues to take the risk.
But
Uh, will he
he,
do it? I don't know.
can he convert a military victory into a political victory? Because that is the million or billion dollar question.
That is the weakness of Israel always has been to turn military into political victories. The only time they did it in the past, 48, 49, of
Yes.
course, you know.
Yes.
There are other examples, but usually they're not so good at that. And by the way, partly because our allies do not allow us to achieve the biggest possible military victory that would then lead to also a good political victory. Take 73.
Hmm.
So in the
We could
end,
have
there was
taken
peace with
Cairo.
Egypt. Yeah, okay. But take, for example, you know what? Take even this situation. If Israel is being forced to stop 2 days before the generals say to Netanyahu, we are almost there finishing the Iranian nuclear program, it will be another example of that. So we'll
Hmm.
see.
Excellent. Joseph Olmert, lots of unanswered questions, lots more to
That's a
discuss.
good interview to ask the right questions. Always what I say to my students, you ask the right questions, then all the answers are legitimate.
On that happy note, we'll see you again, and thank you very much for your
Take care.
time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.